Excellencies, friends of the Dar, ladies and gentlemen, we welcome you to our 25th cultural season with our weekly Monday lectures. It is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Sarang Sharma tonight as our guest lecturer. Tonight's lecture, entitled Political Paradigm of Mughal Gardens in South Asia, a study of the Mughal chaharbagh gardens in Afghanistan, India, and Pakistan. Presented by Mr. Sarang Sharma. Mr. Sarang Sharma is a junior research assistant in Pandoli's auction house in Mumbai. He is pursuing his PhD on Pahari miniature painting and completed his master's in art history at the Maharaja Sayajiro University of Baroda in India, with emphasis on Islamic art and architecture. Before we start, I would like to invite everyone to our exhibition tomorrow in Americani Cultural Center, Al-Fan exhibition, that will start at 5:45. And before we start, please make sure you turn off your phone and welcome our lecturer for tonight. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to be here and to speak about a topic of my special interest, which I began developing during my master's days. I would like to thank Dr. Salam Kokji for having me here, and it wouldn't have been possible without you. Thank you so much. So, my title is The Political Paradigms of the Mughal Gardens in South Asia, a study of the Mughal chaharbagh gardens in Afghanistan, India, and Pakistan. Well, the title is long enough, but I'll try to keep my paper as short as possible. Before we go into the history of chaharbaghs laid by the Mughals, it is better to discuss the etymology and the origins of chaharbagh gardens. So, chaharbagh is a Farsi word which means four gardens or gardens divided into four parts. In the traditional sense of the word, the land is divided into four squares by two axes intersecting at the center. The axes are walkways or canals, which are usually adorned with the placement of a pool or a fountain at the center. The four-square quadripartite gardens was the favorite garden layout for the Persian kings, dating back to the time of the Achaemenid king Cyrus the Great, who laid the first chaharbagh gardens in Pasargad. The origin of gardens in the Near East, in fact, lies in the Sumerian age. To protect the gardens from withering winds and desiccating sun, the Sumerians would plant a belt of trees around the gardens in straight rows. The first literary account of a planned garden actually comes from the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is considered the first literary piece of work in the known world. And it later becomes an integral part of the Abrahamic faiths as the Garden of Eden. As we read this passage from the Old Testament, out of the ground, the Lord God caused to grow every tree that is pleasing to the sight and good for food. The tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Now, a river flowed out of the Eden to water the garden, and from there it divided and became four rivers. The name of the first is Pishon. It flows around the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold. The gold of that land is good, and the bdellium and the onyx stone are there. The name of the second river is Gihon. It flows around the whole land of Cush. The name of the third river is Tigris. It flows east of Assyria, and the fourth river is Euphrates. Then the Lord God took the man and put him into the Garden of Eden to cultivate it and keep it. The Lord God commanded the man, saying, "From any tree of the garden you may eat freely, but from the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat from it you will surely die." What is significant in this passage from the Old Testament is There are 4 rivers which are flowing in that planned garden, which has been guarded with walls. And a tree of life lies right in center of it. It is very much in accordance to the original chaharbagh plan. And the tree of life is usually symbolized with the placement of a pool or a fountain. Gardening in ancient Persia would not be considered any less than a sacred activity, and the king would fancy himself as the divine ruler and Ahura Mazda's shadow on earth. The Achaemenid kings adopted the title of Sayathiyaman, which is Avestan for King of Kings, and the Sasanians adopted the titles of Shahanshah, which means monarch of monarch. Greek historian Xenophon, who was a mercenary in the court of Cyrus IV, he records one of the gardens of Cyrus IV as paradise at Sardis. Xenophon uses the word paradisos, which has roots in the Avestan paradisa, which means enclosed garden. And later, very interestingly, this same Iranian term paradisa will find manifestation in the text of the Holy Quran. And the Arabic counterpart is firdos, which is used to denote paradise. And how does these gardens reach Islam? The Islamic conquest of Iranian Plateau in 636 AD resulted in a two-way cultural exchange, with the Arab influence on the Iranian society and vice versa. It was at this point that the Arabs encountered the lush green chaharbagh gardens. But these were not very alien. In fact, the gardens in Iran echoed to the new Arab conquerors a sense of significance and familiarity. Why? As the Holy Quran describes paradise or heaven as gardens underneath which rivers flow. Every aspect of chaharbagh could seem to have significance and heavenly counterpart in the Islamic interpretation. The rivers of Islamic paradise are numbered to be 4, being the river of water, milk, wine, and honey, each bearing its own symbolic relevance. And the division of universe is also into 4 parts, as per Islamic cosmology. The plan of the chaharbagh garden reflected the division of universe, the water bodies reflect the rivers of paradise, and with time, the flower beds begin to have their own symbolic interpretations. So these are a few verses that I've taken from the different books of the Holy Quran. And as we can see, one similarity that we find in the text is that every single mention of the Islamic garden is gardens with rivers flowing under them. So these verses, they clearly reflect the emphasis which is laid on the water element in the Quranic heaven. The emphasis of running water in Quran could also have roots in the fact that Islam originated from an arid region where the availability of water is scarce. Hence, the very concept of water is considered to be sacred and a symbol of life. The Garden of Paradise is promised to devout Muslims as their final destination, and followers of Islam are encouraged to plant gardens as reflections of paradise on earth. There are no clear references to suggest when the first garden was built by the Muslims, but after the creation of Alhambra in Granada, it was clear that the gardens had already received royal impetus in the Islamic dominions. It is Turco-Mongol conqueror Tamerlane who is credited for introducing the tradition of chaharbagh in Central Asia. Annexing Persia in the last decade of the 14th century, Timur brought along with himself Persian architects, poets, and painters to Samarkand. There were sculptors, stonemasons, and stucco workers from Azerbaijan and Isfahan, mosaic workers from Shiraz, and weavers, glassblowers, and potters from cultural centers as far away as Damascus. The synthesis of artisans coming from different backgrounds resulted in the bloom of Timurid architecture. Timur prided on the grandeur of the buildings of Samarkand, distinctly marked by the blue tiles and highly geometrical designs. And as the Arabic inscription on one of the buildings of Samarkand reads, "If you want to know about us, examine our buildings." And this is very significant in this matter, because architecture of any kind made by any dynasty or belonging to any civilization is nothing but a representation of the patron's own psyche, his idiosyncrasies. It's also a symbol of the prosperity or the order of his empire. And when Timur himself has made such kind of a proclamation, it is very significant to understand Timurid architecture with regard to the same. There were many grand constructional projects which were commissioned during this period in Samarkand, but the gardens of Samarkand, they are remarkable and receive special attention. Most of these gardens, they don't survive anymore, but Babur, who was the founder of Mughal Empire in India, wrote extensively about the gardens of Samarkand in his memoirs of Baburnama. This is Zahiruddin Muhammad Babur, the first Mughal. Babur was born as a Timurid prince, and his rise to power goes hand in hand with the troubled political scenario of Central Asia. He ascended the throne of Fargana, present-day Uzbekistan, at the age of 11, and lost his kingdom when his campaign to conquer Samarkand failed and his nobles rebelled against him. After several unsuccessful attempts to seize Samarkand and losing all claims to the state of Fargana, Babur first sought refuge in Tashkent, which was his maternal uncle's place, and later, with the help of tribal warlords, he was able to conquer Kabul. While attempting to strengthen his hold on Kabul, the city of Herat, which was the capital of the Timurid Empire and a great cultural center, was captured by the Uzbeks. Timurid princes came to seek refuge in Kabul, which further enhanced the status of Babur in the Timurid hegemonical structure. At this point, Babur abandons the title of Mirza, which means prince in the Timurid lineage. Babur's father was a ruler of Fargana, but he still had the title of Mirza because in the Timurid power structure, there could be a sultan and other distant relatives would never be considered rulers, even though if they are ruling over a dominion on their own. So this is how the whole Timurid structure of sovereignty functions. And after coming to Kabul and the loss of the Timurid Empire to the Uzbeks, and Babur being this great central figure in the Timurid hegemony, he adopts the Turkic title of Padshah, which was never done earlier by any Timurid emperor. They used to denote themselves with the title of Sultan. This move of Babur declaring himself the Padshah is a turning point in the Timurid political history, as it marks the beginning of a new sovereign political dynasty and knells the death bell of the Timurid rule. Among the first constructional projects undertaken by Babur as an imperial, it is the chaharbagh of Bagh-e-Wafa, which is of great interest. His memoirs are full of references to his favorite garden. About Bagh-e-Wafa, Babur writes, I laid out the chaharbagh, known as Bagh-e-Wafa, on a rising ground. Facing south, the garden lies high, has running water close at hand. This is a canal being carved out of a source of water at the top of the rocky hill. And the water is being stored in a pool, which will later be used to irrigate the garden and provide water for the canals, which will intersect and breaking it into 4 parts. In the middle of it, a 1 mil stream flows continuously past the little hill on which are the 4 garden plots. This is the best part of the garden, a most beautiful sight when the oranges take color. Truly, the garden is admirably situated. So here are a few folios from the book of Baburnama, 2 different books of Baburnama commissioned during the reign of Akbar. And in the first painting, Babur can be seen examining the construction of Bagh-e-Wafa. And here are the orange trees that he mentioned, which reflect that the paintings are in much adherence to the text of the original memoir. And in the second painting, the construction of Bagh-e-Wafa has been completed, and Babur is visiting the site for the first time. The name Bagh-e-Wafa is of great significance and a point of notable interest in my opinion. While Bagh-e-Wafa in Persian means garden of fidelity, the person to whom Babur claims his faithfulness remains unknown. Either this fidelity is to Allah. Being a devout Muslim, Babur might have taken it as a responsibility to build a garden in the reflection of the paradise on earth. On the other hand, this loyalty could belong to Timur, his self-mentioned idol and the center of Timurid power structure. The Timurid aspect of Babur's loyalty becomes much clearer when he launches his invasion of India, invoking a Timurid claim. Now, what is this Indian connection of Timur, which makes it very significant for Babur while he launches his first attempt to invade Delhi? The northern parts of Indian subcontinent were seized by Timur in 1398, even though he never ruled in the subcontinent, and the region never became a part of the Timurid dominion. On the other hand, for Babur, who had lost all his claims to his homeland and remained in constant threats of Uzbeks in Kabul, India seemed like a greener pasture. Carrying forward his Timurid claim on the Indian Empire, and after a decisive battle at Panipat, Babur conquered Delhi in 1526. After establishing himself in Agra, he laid Aram Bagh, or the Garden of Rest, marking the beginning of chaharbaghs in India. This is Aram Bagh, which is presently known as Ram Bagh, even though that was not the original name. It was renamed by Marathas later when they took power of Agra into their own hands. So we can see these canals which are made in the causeways, which run throughout the garden, and there are pools of water right in the center. And stairs are kept for people to sit alongside the pool in leisurely activities. But this is not the original plan for Aram Bagh because it was renovated by Jahangir's wife Noor Jahan. Aram Bagh is a riverfront garden laid on the banks of Yamuna River. The water of the river in northern Indian plains is still, unlike the streams of water gushing out of water tanks on the slanting hills of Kabul. Hence, by laying a garden next to the river provides a steady source of water for the irrigation purpose, as well as for the canals of the garden axis. The garden was laid on the eastern bank of Yamuna, while the pre-Mughal monuments in Agra were predominantly constructed on the western side. This move is read symbolically as an attempt to mark distinction between the previous sultanate and the newly emerging empire, as well as the beginning of the domestication of Indian lands. The Mughals, including Babur himself and his later successors, they adhered closely to their Timurid identity and heritage, even after losing their original base of power and support. Till the time of Jahangir, we see that the word Timurid is being used in his texts, and the word Mughal seldomly encounters the eyes of the reader. And even after adorning the title of Padshah, Babur himself and the later Mughals kept on using the title of Gurkani, or son-in-law, for their dynasty, as Timur legitimized his empire through marriage to a Chingizid princess. So that way, every single person belonging to this Timurid heritage is having a claim to the throne, being the son-in-law of Chengiz Khan. And Babur's father himself, Umar Sheikh Mirza II, was married to Kutluk Nigar Khanum, another Chingizid princess. This gives rise to a question: why this kind of loyalty? Why would Jahangir and Aurangzeb, who come to power almost after 100 years of Babur annexing Kabul, they would send money for the upkeepment of Timur's tomb in Samarkand? Well, even after the end of the Timurid political dynasty, their political potency had kept on enjoying wide acknowledgement and esteem in various courts all over the Islamic dominion. And the Timurid model was viewed as the pinnacle of imperial culture. Babur, having suffered the traumatic loss of power and military strength, and also of homeland, for him, the reification of a Timurid identity at India was the struggle to establish a real entity to counter the sense of loss and void felt by this branch of Timurid community in exile. Driven by his own love for gardens, as well as a symbolic reference of continuing the Timurid lineage, the chaharbaghs laid by Babur justify his sovereignty and legitimized his empire. Even though Babur ruled over India and was very well established in Agra, he never loved mainland India as much as he loved the hills of Kabul. And this is also highlighted by the fact that till the time of Humayun, most of the Mughal nobles, they will keep their families in Kabul. So it suggests that the first or the earlier Mughals, they were just transient rulers and never ever identified themselves as emperors of India. After settling down in India, he wrote a letter to his governor in Kabul, instructing him to keep the Kabul gardens well watered and properly maintained. In his will, he desires to be buried in a garden in Kabul, which is known as Bagh-e-Babur, or the Garden of Babur. This is Bagh-e-Babur in Kabul. It was actually planned to be a leisure garden for having time with family. But his love for this garden was so much that eventually he decided to be buried right on top of it. So this is the sloping hill. Water comes from here, gushes down from these terraces, and finally gets collected here. And the chaharbaghs can be seen adjacent, opposite to each other, which is being intersected by this single canal. This garden model is very similar to the gardens of the Mughals, which they will later construct in Kashmir, and has a direct inspiration for them. But this garden was not, originally it was not planned to be a tomb garden. It was just his will, which he decides much later after the construction of it, that he wants to be buried in this. But later renovations by Shah Jahan actually turned this garden into a graveyard, while marble was added to enclose his tomb. There was a mosque constructed next to it, and then this garden became a tomb garden, even though it was not intended to be. Here are some other pictures of Bagh-e-Babar. So these are the staircases which lead to the tomb of Babur right on top. And the water falls down from this canal. Babur was succeeded by his son Humayun. Humayun led a turbulent political career and proved himself to be a weak and incompetent ruler. Within 10 years of his accession, he lost all of Babur's empire to his brothers and Babur's rebellious generals. Seeking the help of Shah Tahmasp of Iran, where he lived as a guest for almost 15 years, he led a series of campaigns in India and re-established his empire in 1555. Having spent a long span of his political life first as a refugee and later being largely indulged in warfare, he never received the opportunity to undertake architectural constructions. He never constructed a single garden in his life, but it is his tomb that marks the beginning of grand imperial chaharbaghs in India. And it is laid in a hushed bihisht layout, which is a Timurid construct. So hushed bihisht is a Farsi term. Hushed means 8 and bihisht would be heavens. As per the book of Quran, there are 8 gateways to heaven, which is reflected in the plan of Humayun's tomb garden. So here's the tomb, which is situated right in the center of the garden, which encloses it on 4 sides. And the tomb is octagonal in form, and there are 8 corners where we can see steps descending down, leading to one garden avenue. What is interesting in this plan is, if we look at it in general, so we see there are 2 broad axes which intersect the garden layout into 4 equal parts, as per the chaharbagh plan. So that would be the first garden, the second one, the third, and so on. But interestingly, even these garden plots get intersected further, which results in a total of 8 gardens being constructed. And diagonally, when we see it this way, when the octagonal tomb is placed in the center, so every single point of entry through the tomb will have a garden right in front of it. So this is hushed bihisht being manifested in the garden layout. Humayun's tomb became the precursor for having the deceased emperor placed at the center of the garden. The Islamic conception of paradise is a garden with running water. In the center of the garden, where the 4 rivers intersect, lies the tree of life, which is usually represented by the placement of a fountain. The placement of a mausoleum in the center of the garden symbolizes the placement of the deceased in paradise. It also suggests that the dead emperor is the nexus of the cosmological garden, which further enhances his status. In my opinion, the posthumous titles awarded to the Mughal emperors have a direct connection to the situation of a tomb in the paradise garden. So as we can see, the Mughals, they never reigned with their birth names, and every single Mughal had a Persian title to adapt for themselves. So the first Mughal, Zahiruddin Muhammad, he ruled and is better known by his title Babur, which means tiger in Farsi. Nasiruddin Muhammad is better known as Humayun, or the Blessed. Jalaluddin Muhammad, is known as Akbar the Great. Nuruddin Muhammad Salim is known as Jahangir, the Caesar of the world. And Shahabuddin Muhammad Khurram is better known as Shah Jahan, which means the king of the world. But after their deaths, their successors, they award them posthumous titles, which are very interesting. So Babur, in the later text, he was called as Firdaus Makani, or the one who dwells in paradise, as his tomb was laid in the garden. Humayun becomes Jannat Ashiani, sheltered in paradise. Akbar is Arsh Ashiani, nesting in paradise. Jahangir is Jannat Makhani, the one who dwells in paradise. And Shah Jahan is Firdaus Ashiani, nesting in paradise. Even the later Mughals, the first 6 Mughals are known as the Great Mughals. Even the not so great Mughals are known by similar posthumous titles, which were awarded with time. Humayun was succeeded by his son Jalaluddin Muhammad Akbar, who can actually be called the founder of Mughal dynasty, because it is at this time that Mughal Empire becomes stable in India for the first time. Jalaluddin Muhammad Akbar. A major shift in Mughal political paradigm took place during the reign of Humayun's son Jalaluddin Akbar, inarguably the greatest among the Mughal emperors. Ascending the throne at the age of 13, Akbar spearheaded an aggressive expansionist policy aided by his regent Bairam Khan. As a result, the Mughal territories increased rapidly and reached faraway dominions. Being the ruler of a vast empire and ruling over a diverse demography of ethnicities, languages, and religions, Akbar invented a more centralized system of governance, taking away the autonomy enjoyed by the nobility and military commanders in the Timurid tradition. Matrimonial alliances were formed with the Hindu Rajput courts, and high ranks in the Mughal armies were awarded to the Rajput princes. In order to appear familiar and indigenous to his Hindu subjects, the emperor, in a fashion similar to the Rajput kings, addressed the public audience at the balcony on a daily basis. Jizya tax from non-Muslims were also abolished. As a result, the Mughal Empire became a strong political state with a flourishing economy, stable military, and relative social harmony. In 1576, Akbar commissioned the compilation of a manuscript titled Tarikh-e-Khandan-e-Timuriya, which means the history of the family of Timur. 1/3 of the book records the accomplishments of Timurid rulers till the birth of Akbar, while the rest of the book is centered on Akbar's triumphs as an emperor. The manuscript solidifies the fact that while the Timurid claim was not completely abandoned, but Akbar's achievements had surpassed those of his ancestors, including Timur himself. Also, the fact that Akbar was the first emperor to have been born in India has a lot to do with his formation of the social political policy. Special consideration for the Hindu majority, employment for Rajput chiefs at admiral ranks, and introduction of local customs and festivities in the royal palace displays his desire to place himself as the indigenous king of a native empire, rather than a foreign monarch ruling over an alien land. Elements of Hindu iconography dominated the imperial architecture. Timurid bulbous domes were replaced with Indian chhatris or canopies, and red sandstone became the medium of choice for monuments. By the early 1570s, Akbar begins to develop a curiosity towards theology and invited Islamic, Sufi, Hindu, and Christian scholars to the Mughal capital of Fatehpur Sikri. And this led to the formation of Ibadat Khana, or the house of worship, where leaders of different faiths would be called and there would be debates and discussions on theological doctrines. Akbar begins to reconcile the differences between the teachings of various religions by laying the foundation of a new faith called Deen-e-Ilahi, or faith of the divine. Even though this move responded in the form of a rebellion by Islamic clerics, declaring Akbar a heretic, it solidified his position as the universal monarch, and devotion to him came from subjects from any social, ethnic, and religious background. Abul Fazl, Akbar's chief vizier and the author of his biography Akbarnama, also helped in transforming the emperor into a legend with supernatural abilities. He mentions Akbar as Insan-e-Kamil, which means the perfect man, and Far-e-Azadi, the divine light. Akbar becomes the face of the empire, God's light on earth, and disobedience to Akbar would be considered disobedience to God. On top of this, Abul Fazl constructs a divine genealogy for Akbar. His descent was traced back to Adam and the other divine figures from the Holy Bible. As per the text of Akbarnama, at the moment of his birth, a bright light entered the bosom of the nurse as Akbar came into the world. This episode is justified as the moment when God decided to manifest the light which was being carried through the long line of great rulers before him, placing him in the direct genealogy. Hence, Akbar went from becoming Zile Ilahi, which means shadow of God, to Fare Izadi, which means light of God. So here, as we can see, this is a later portrait, by the way. So Akbar is adorning a halo behind his head, which later became a fashion for all the Mughal emperors to show, suggesting their divine heritage. And angels can be seen on top playing triumphantic music, and one angel places the imperial crown on Emperor Akbar's head. In one hand, he holds a sword. On the other, he holds a rosary, which marks his balance of both spirituality and his abilities as a military commander. In the center, in the bottom part, a lion and a cow can be seen perfectly in harmony to each other, which marks the stability of Mughal Empire, and there are no violence of different communities among themselves. One important Akbar garden is the one surrounding his tomb in Sikandara. The layout of Akbar's tomb in Sikandara is very much similar to the tomb of Humayun that we saw earlier, and not a lot of evolution is there to be seen. There are 4 gardens on 4 sides, and a placement of a terrace in the middle of them results in 4 more gardens to be planted. And even though there are 4 canals in the actual plan, this painting shows only 1. Being very similar to the garden layout of Humayun's tomb, and the construction began during the time of Akbar and was completed after his death by his son Jahangir. Jahangir, in his memoirs of Tuzke Jahangiri, describes the construction of the tomb in a very detailed manner. And interestingly, a ritualistic function was attached to his tomb, as suggested by these descriptions from the book. On Thursday, the first of the divine month of Aban, I went on a pilgrimage to the mausoleum of the late king and rubbed the head of supplication on the threshold, the abode of angels. All the begums and other ladies, having sought the blessing of circulation around that shrine, which is the circling place of angels, presented offerings. Another one. On the eve of Friday, a lofty assembly was held of the holy men, the turbaned people, Hafaz, and singing people, assembled in number and practiced ecstasies and religious dancing. So it also shows that Akbar was not being followed just as a king after his death anymore, but he was seen more of a saintly figure, and his tomb is still being worshipped to this very day. Perhaps the greatest garden Akbar laid in his life was a politically and economically stable empire, which provided his successors, Jahangir and Shah Jahan, to pursue their interests and ambitions as unparalleled patrons of art and architecture. Jahangir was blessed with an already well-established and prosperous kingdom on his accession to power. Unlike his father and great-grandfather, growing up in a royal household, Jahangir celebrated a pompous lifestyle and dedicated much of his time to leisurely activities. Being a man of refined tastes, Jahangir remained a great connoisseur of art and architecture, providing never-ending impetus to painters, poets, and architects in his atelier. Being the most passionate among all the Mughal emperors, Jahangir greatly followed the Persian concept of emperor as a divine ruler. In several portraits, Jahangir is depicted standing on a globe, suggesting his domination on the world, while angels place a crown on his head, revealing his identity as the promised ruler. In the background, an array of flags can be seen descending down from heaven, which also marks his divine lineage. The painting is titled Jahangir Murders Poverty in His Reign, and this person is the symbolism of poverty, and Jahangir shoots him with an arrow, while another angel figure right here provides him with more arrows to kill poverty even further. Other than painting, Jahangir also showed a love for gardening, which was manifested well in the valley of Kashmir. Jahangir visited Kashmir 13 times, and lavish, extravagant gardens were constructed during this period. He also shifts his capital to Lahore, as it was shortening the way to Kashmir. The significance Jahangir bestowed upon gardens can be understood in the following verse of Jahangirnama, written at Ahmedabad in the 12th year of his reign. At this time, the gardener presented that a servant of Muqarrab Khan had cut down some champa trees along the bench alongside the river. On hearing this, I became angry and went myself to inquire into the matter and to exact satisfaction. When it was established that this improper act has been committed by him, I ordered both his thumbs to be cut off as a warning to others. This is from the Shalimar Garden of Kashmir. Shalimar remained the favorite garden of Jahangir and the most imperial one. The design of the garden remains simple. At the head of the garden lies a small river which is diverted into a broad shallow canal leading to a wide rectangular basin in which the main black marble pavilion is set, surrounded on all sides by fountains and water. In its layout, the garden is divided into several terraces with gardens built on them. Because the garden is based on a slanting hill, the garden is divided into 3 pavilions connected with stairs. These are the 3 pavilions. The platforms are arranged in an hierarchical order, with the lowest one kept for Diwan-e-Aam, or house of the audience. The one above is Diwan-e-Khas, or the hall of private audiences, which was kept reserved for emperors, officials, and courtiers. Diwan-e-Khas was placed right below the ladies' garden or the Zanana garden. And here is Jahangir's black marble pavilion, which was added by Shah Jahan. The emperor would place his seat at the center of the 4 artificial canals, replacing the otherwise situated fountain. The terraces are connected with stairs descending from the top terrace to the bottom one, with the artificial canal flowing over them, providing the canal a torrential force to merge into the lake. The placement of emperor on the highest terrace lets him to enjoy the view, and secondly, marks his hierarchical supremacy over his subjects and courtiers. On the other hand, emperor sitting in the center of the 4 canals is also suggestive of his divine status while living, which is a hegemonical shift which we are seeing. The architectural hierarchy can also be observed in the portraits of Padshahnama. These are a few images from Shalimar. So on one side, we can see the canal water descending from one terrace to the other, thus watering the fountains. And this is the black marble pavilion, where Jahangir would spend his time with the ladies of the harem. The architectural hierarchy can also be observed in the portraits of Padshahnama. This is Shah Jahan attending his court. The emperor sits on the top center, while his courtiers and subjects stand in rows according to their ranks. So this is the emperor's section, kept for himself and other royal figures of maybe princes and progenies. The second section here is Diwan-e-Khas, which is the section meant for the nobility and other important courtmen. The third section right here is the Diwan-e-Aam, or the hall of the general audience. And the difference can also be seen in the jewelry or the lavish costumes the people of these 2 sections are adorning. The power of the deceased emperor as the dweller of paradise was first being reflected by the tomb gardens. By the time we reached 1620, the Mughal emperor has become a living embodiment of paradise on earth. And I have taken a few passages from the Islamic cosmological doctrines, which were developed by al-Biruni. Al-Biruni has divided nature into 3 levels: the heavens, the sublunar region, and the human world. Of these, the human world is the world of generation and corruption. The sublunar region, it is beyond change and incorruptible, and the heavens surrounding this are infinite and divine. The hierarchy placed in nature, as suggested by al-Biruni, is also finding reflection in the gardens of Kashmir. The first terrace of the common man is very much like the first level of nature, the human world. The second platform of Diwan-e-Khas was supposed to be visited only by the royal courtiers, noblemen, and their guests. So this second terrace is supposed to be incorruptible and beyond change, like the sublunar sphere of nature, marking the stability of the emperor's court. The third terrace of Shalimar is the Zenana Garden, with rows of chinar trees and a quad-axial water channel. Zenana Garden was supposed to be used only by the women of the court, and all kind of male entry except for the emperor was prohibited. By establishing the Zenana on the third and the last terrace of Shalimar, which only the emperor has access to, Jahangir suggests his status as the chosen one who can enter the third sphere of nature, the heaven, which is infinite and divine. In order to support my claims further, I have taken the example of Nishad Bagh of Kashmir, led by Asif Khan, the Prime Minister of Shah Jahan, and the father of Mumtaz Mahal, Shah Jahan's favorite wife. In terms of design and layout, Nishad Bagh bears immediate similarity to Shalimar. It is also divided into step pavilions with flowing canal dividing the garden into two parts. However, instead of having three terraces in accordance to the plan of Shalimar, Nishad has only two as an act of homage to the Mughal emperor's supremacy. It also marks the devotion of the prime minister to the monarch, as Asif Khan is depicted standing in subservience to Shah Jahan in many portraits. While the young princes and progenies of Shah Jahan adorned halos, such kind of ornamentation and symbolism of royal decree is also absent in his depiction. Hence, the paradise is only for emperor and cannot be claimed even by the closest of confidants. The hierarchical design of Shalimar Kashmir appealed to Shah Jahan, Jahangir's successor, and the terrace garden became the new epitome of Mughal garden. Seeking inspiration from the layout of Shalimar Bagh and his love for Asif Khan's Nishad Bagh, Shah Jahan constructed another garden by the name of Shalimar in Lahore, which is the most expensive Mughal garden ever constructed. Shah Jahan Shalimar Bagh, which is usually known as Shalimar Baghs that we will see in the plan, is a complex of three different terrace gardens connected together with causeways. So this is Shalimar Lahore, and the lower part of, so this is the view of the upper terrace, which is the ladies' harem, same as the Shalimar in Kashmir. And this is the lower terrace, which is the hall of audience. Rather, Shalimar's lower terrace is dedicated completely to the nobles, courtiers, and dignified guests. And this water pool right here, this is the middle terrace, or the emperor's garden. And a great significance is laid on the water element rather than the garden itself. The lower terrace of the garden is the garden of nobility and honored Mughal guests here. The middle garden is the emperor's garden, comprising of a large pool of water with a terrace situated in the middle, surrounded by fountains on four sides. The third and upper terrace of Shalimar is the ladies' garden. The upper terrace of the gardens is named Bagh-e-Farah Bakhsh, which is bestower of pleasure. The second and the third terraces jointly are known as Bagh-e-Faiz Bakhsh, meaning bestower of goodness. The first and the third terraces are both shaped as squares, while the second terrace is narrow rectangle. In its plan, the garden consists of two different square quadripartite gardens linked together with the water pool of the middle garden. Every partition of the chaharbagh gets further divided by two axes of water running through them. These are the two axes of every single quadripartite section, resulting in a total of 16 chaharbaghs in either of the two pavilions. The Shalimar of Lahore is best known for its waterworks, and the water elements are the main attraction of the site. Unlike the gardens of Kashmir, which relied on naturally sloping landscapes, the waterworks in Lahore required extensive engineering to create artificial cascades and terraces. To irrigate the garden and support its water system, a canal was created from the foothills of Kashmir and streamed to Lahore, covering a distance of 161 kilometers. A little above 100,000 rupees was spent only on the canals in that time's money. The garden contains 410 fountains, which are discharged into wide marble pools, each known as a hause. So the first garden, upper garden, has 105 fountains. The middle one has 152 fountains, even though it covers such a small area. And the third terrace has 153 fountains to itself. The placement of the emperor's garden in the center of the two terraces is similar to the Shalimar in Kashmir and can be interpreted in the same cosmological interpretation of hierarchy. However, the association of the emperor's terrace with the lower terrace as a single body disassociates it from the upper terrace and results in a plan in which the garden is laid not surrounding the emperor's seat, but at the feet of it, as it is visible here. To interpret it in terms of politics and cosmology, it is better to undertake a study of the garden layout, which is continuation of this very plan, the garden of the Taj Mahal. Taj Mahal is inarguably the most popular Mughal monument, the last grand as well as experimental Mughal garden plan. The Taj Mahal Garden is the ultimate manifestation of Timuridan Mughal chaharbagh layouts. The garden is divided into 4 squares, which further get divided into 4 squares, and again the division happens with flower beds. Even though the garden is laid as a mausoleum garden, the tomb does not lie at the center of it, as seen in Humayun's garden tomb, as well as the tomb of Akbar. But it is replaced with a lotus tank with a cusped border, reflecting Taj in its water. So here's the pool, which has a reflection of Taj, which can be seen in many of the famous photos of this monument. The Marble Mausoleum, which bears Quranic inscriptions of the Last Day of Judgment, rests on a raised platform higher than the garden and provides an unhindered view of itself from any angle. The view of scholarship remains divided on the eccentric design of Taj Mahal. Abba Kok has maintained that the placement of the tomb on the edge of the garden was done for specific conditions of Indian plains, where slow-flowing rivers provide the water source. The water is raised from the river by animal-driven devices known as purs and gets stored in cisterns. Other scholars suggest that Mehtab Garden, which was originally constructed by Babur on the other bank of the river Yamuna, is an integral part of the same complex, thus situating the garden at the center of the river in a tradition of the pure chaharbagh. The incorporation of Mehtab Bagh in the Chaharbagh garden plan also allows the river Yamuna, which is considered sacred and held at high reverence by the Hindus, to cross directly through the Chaharbagh, which elevates the status of the deceased emperor higher than the previous tombs with surrounding hushed-behisht complexes, with a real river which is sacred to run through it. The last and the most interesting reading of the Taj Mahal garden layout was put forth by Wayne A. Begley, who reads Taj Mahal as a monument in which Shah Jahan has appropriated the authority of the throne of God, symbolism for the glorification of his own reign. In 1996, Begley stated that it is likely that the diagram of the plane of assembly, which is Ard al-Hashar in Arabic, on the Day of Judgment by Sufi mystic and philosopher Ibn Arabi was a source of inspiration for the layout of the Taj Mahal garden. Ibn Arabi was held in high regard at the time, and many copies of Futuhat al-Makkiyah that contains the diagram were available in India. The diagram shows Arsh, the throne of God, the circle with the 8 stars, which is very similar to the octagonal design of Taj Mahal tomb. Pulpits for the righteous, al-Aminun, 7 rows of angel, Gabriel, Araf, Hawz al-Kausar, which is the fountain of abundance, which is represented as the semicircle in the layout. Al-Maqam al-Mahmud, the praiseworthy station where the Prophet Muhammad will stand to intercede for the faithful, which is here, somewhere it would be here in the plan of Taj Mahal. The general proportion and the placement of the throne, the pulpits and the Kausar fountain show striking similarities with the Taj Mahal and its gardens. Quranic inscriptions of the Last Judgments carved on the walls of this monument and the plane of assembly being the inspiration for this mathematically calculated plan of the site puts Shah Jahan in a position which was neither claimed by any of his predecessors, nor was it manifested in any of the architectural constructions. Akbar and Jahangir harnessed desires of being represented as divinity, yet in terms of God's shadow on earth, acting as mediators between heaven and earth. In terms of the above interpretation, which remains controversial but has been widely accepted, Shah Jahan declared himself the supreme sovereign, a king above kings, a monarch above monarchs, and a god among men. He becomes the ultimate lord of paradise, which rests at his feet and is forever abode, floats above it. Building the tomb in a Timurid fashion with a bulbous double dome and minarets on four sides, which are features which had become uncommon in the imperial Mughal architecture for more than half a century. Shah Jahan proclaims himself as the greatest Timurid emperor, and the Taj Mahal becomes the symbol of Timurid authority in India. The only difference was that this time the intention was not to claim legitimization of Timurid descent, but to proclaim that the Central Asian monarch has been overshadowed. Even though the crown was being offered to Shah Jahan from Timur, it was Shah Jahan's halo which shone brighter. Thank you.